The Two Rivers Police Department transcript. Here's where it gets wonky, to me anyway. When they bring him into the Two Rivers Police Station for a second interview later that same day, which might I add is only an hour and 7 minutes from the end of the first interview, in a different location no less, and we'll forget about the coincidentally timed audio cuts since tape recorders did that sometimes, even though it was 2006, the year before the iPhones released. But they bring him to the Two Rivers Police Station for the second interview later that same day, and without having said anything self-incriminating, they change the opening. They actually start to Mirandize him. They start with, "You have the right to remain silent," instead of starting out with, "You're not under arrest," like they did just hours before. What raises my eyebrows is that so far Brendan Dassey has done nothing to implicate himself in the murder of Teresa Halbach, and in fact, he's actually helping the police trying to piece together the events of what happened that night, and at worst, he's feeding them a load of bull. If they believe his story to this point, and believe that he didn't say anything to anyone because he was scared, why Mirandize him? They didn't before. Why would any of those scenarios lead a detective to start out with a Miranda warning? So, 1. Why is he being Mirandized now? Do they have it set in their minds that Brendan Dassey is their Lee Harvey Oswald? They will arrest him in less than 48 hours, and as far as I know, his mother is not involved in any of these interviews and up to this point knows nothing of what her son has said to the police. 2. Have they told Brendan Dassey's mom about this? This second interview is taking place the same day, and there's only an hour between interviews, so it's not possible that she would have been able to hear the first audio tape. But did they call her in between and tell her even the gist of what he told them? Did they not tell her anything until they slapped the cuffs on him 2 days and 2 interviews later? 3. Why is his mother not in on this interview? I read somewhere that she said the detectives questioning him without her was fine, but wouldn't they want to have her there anyway to maybe have her corroborate something he might say? He's technically not an adult. Is the Wisconsin law such that no parental presence is needed? Even so, wouldn't it at least be a CYA move? The crime happened 4 months ago, so it's not like his testimony is an immediate necessity, so they really could wait for her to be present if they wanted to. 4. He stated in the other interview that his mom doesn't get off work until 5 p.m. since they asked when and where she works. Are they already aware of the fact that they can sculpt his story? Are they aware of the fact that they have a certain amount of time to do so before his mom may very well put a stop to this whole line of questioning? I'm sure there are some of you out there that think I'm reaching with both hands. The prosecution successfully convicted on account of mutilating a corpse when there was absolutely no proof that such a thing ever occurred. That and this event that I'm about to admit to in order to prove my point. This story that I'm about to tell right now occurred before cell phones were around, so if you wanted to know where somebody was, you had to call a house phone. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening to this, but do you remember that Christmas when you and Dad went to Jack and Betty's for that Christmas party? The couple whose house is an hour away? And I called their house to find out where Dad kept his long needle-nose pliers so that I could fix my necklace? Let's just say that my necklace was perfectly fine, even though I told you that my girlfriend at the time was with her family up north. Guess what? She wasn't. Since I talked to them at their friend's house on their friend's house phone, I knew that even if they headed home right after hanging up the phone with me, that I had at least an hour to do whatever it was we so desired. Or whatever it was that my girlfriend and I so desired with the 57 minutes remaining. But anyway, the point of me telling that story was I knew that I was in the clear for a guaranteed set amount of time to do whatever it was that I wanted to do. Were these detectives up to the same thing, starting out with a Miranda verse, which wound up to an arrest not too long after? And this is my analysis of the interview before Brendan Dassey says a word. So, to start off the analysis of this interview, Brendan Dassey changes the time from being there from 9 to 9:30. That was right after this dialogue that I'm going to quote here. What's your address? 12930 A Avery Road. What city? Wisconsin. Real Einstein here. Again, is he competent enough to be a reliable witness? He then proceeds to give almost the exact same statement he did the first time, but adds at the very end, and this is Brendan Dassey talking, and I seen her toe when we dropped the seat later off on, I seen her forehead and her belly. That was Brendan Dassey. He starts off talking about the toes and the hands again, which were the very thing that Special Agent Fassbender mentioned in the prior interview that day. Brendan Dassey then said he saw her fat belly, which is puzzling to me since she was rail thin, and then he said he saw her forehead. When asked how he knew it was a forehead, he said because it had ziggly lines in it. Ziggly as in wrinkly? I've never cooked a piece of meat that was forehead thin or otherwise, and it got ziggly. Keep in mind, she was only 25, so wrinkly's out. And he saw toes? Where were the shoes? Did Steven Avery supposedly take them off to rape Teresa Halbach? If so, where were her pants? Speaking of pants, or no pants actually, wouldn't that be the first thing that a 16-year-old boy would look at and remember? A 16-year-old boy who in 2005 would have access to, at best, dial-up internet, if at all, being in the middle of bum-blank Wisconsin? Not to mention, he's probably still a virgin, so any feminine nakedness would probably be something that sticks out in his mind, her womanly bits instead of her ziggly forehead. Also, he got nailed on mutilation of a corpse, but yet said at the beginning that she was in one piece. I don't know why they would keep asking about this, but they do ask him again and again. Is this to get the other charge tacked on? Again, the state just has to get you on one count to lock you away for a long time. Which, either way, they have no forensics to parallel his story anyway at all. Forensics did no grid collection, and there were multiple burn piles to which they couldn't pinpoint the actual burn site. 55-gallon barrels can easily fit a human body in it with no need to cut it up. I saw no testimony to it, nor was there tool or bone evidence that her body was ever cut up. Then, after they put more stuff on the fire, which is counterintuitive to Brendan Dassey seeing something under the stuff that's already there instead of what was supposedly on top of Teresa Halbach, then Steven Avery, with all the extra stuff on top of her, uses a shovel to move things around, and that's when Brendan Dassey supposedly saw Teresa Halbach's body? Now Steven Avery can bend the laws of physics and a shovel can easily move the dead weight of a human body and a pile of kindling on top of that? He also says that Steven Avery drove the body to the bonfire with his snowmobile sled. Oh wait, no he didn't. He pulled the snowmobile sled by himself. Okay, which is it, Brendan? A sled that never came into question in the trial and obviously never had Teresa Halbach's DNA on it. And these seasoned professionals are believing this? If Steven Avery tied her up and stabbed her in the Jeep, and by Jeep did he mean RAV4, or was there another vehicle that the cops either didn't find or didn't search for? But if he stabbed her in the Jeep, then why would he need a snowmobile sled to do any sort of transporting? This is where it twists. These two seasoned law enforcement professionals probably have one of three thoughts going through their mind. Remember, this is two separate guys with two separate thoughts. One, this kid is fabricating all of this, which obviously isn't the case because they keep questioning him for hours instead of bringing his mother in to help catch him in a lie. Two, they think he did it or think he might have done it, to which the line of questioning would already be on that path, have branched at least slightly to that path, or branched to that path from here on out. Three, they want to get him pinned on this crime too. To do that, you have to get what you need in a way that isn't readily detectable. You need corroborating evidence. Now you can go back and watch the interview and decide for yourself, but the next few questions totally flip direction for no reason and don't go back that way again for the rest of the interview. Which is really odd because if they think he did it, why stop traversing that path? But they do. And the remainder of the interview, which is more than half the total length of the interview, they never go back to that line of questioning. But the scary part is that the brief line of questioning comes almost like a reflex. Almost like they're tipping their hand before they get a corroborating piece of evidence to tie him to this crime. Keep in mind that Brendan Dassey has said that the reason he never told anyone about this is because his uncle supposedly told him not to tell anyone or he'd stab him. Which sounds legit, but it's also what makes this verbal exchange so odd and out of context. This is on page 11 and 12 out of 29 in the transcript. Watch what happens when Brendan Dassey almost recants the whole thing and proclaims Steven Avery's innocence. Watch what the investigators do. And these are quotes. Fassbender, did he say anything about that hole? Referring to the supposed hole in Teresa Halbach's shirt from getting stabbed in the stomach. Brendan Dassey, no. Fassbender, okay. Wiegert, did he tell you when he did this? Brendan Dassey, no. Wiegert, how has this affected you? Brendan Dassey, I've been sad for at least 3 or 4 months. which is why they said they originally came to interview him, because for the last 3 or 4 months he seemed sad and lost weight, so he must be hiding something awful, right? Not to mention that they even told him that the reason they're there is because people have noticed that he's been sad for 3 or 4 months, so he even right here parrots this notion. To continue the quote, Wiegert, what have you been sad about? Now listen carefully. Brendan Dassey, quote, I thought that he didn't do it, and I felt sorry for Teresa's family, end quote. So basically, to me anyway, he's stating, not right after Steven Avery's arrested, but 4 months after he's arrested. And Brendan Dassey is supposedly telling the cops all these grim details that no one else knows and that no one else up until this day has ever heard of, and he says that he felt bad because he thought Steven Avery didn't do it? How could you have possibly thought that Steven Avery didn't do it when you're the only one who was supposedly witness to the fact that he indeed did do it, and answer that question with, I thought that he didn't do it? That should have been a huge red flag for these 2 investigators to say, whoa, perhaps this kid is telling us bogus stuff. He tells us all this gore, and then he says he's been sad because he thinks his uncle didn't do it? Something's fishy. He's not answering our questions like somebody with information, much less psychologically distressing information, and to boot, none of his testimony matches up to any evidence we've ever found. I'm sorry, but unless this wonderful use of taxpayer resources in this room, along with Brendan Dassey, have a combined total IQ of a pasta bowl, they should have figured this out. But they apparently don't. Instead of knowing that they have all this stuff on tape already from the one person who would believably have been there at the fire that supposedly burned Teresa Halbach, it finally gives them the narrative as to what possibly happened, even though they don't have the most important piece of MMO, or means motive opportunity. They don't yet have the motive, which is why they keep asking Brendan Dassey why Steven Avery did it. Even though they had this all on tape, with this one answer, they now see their case slipping away from them. To me, their response almost seems like they tipped their hand. Up until this point, they have never asked, because they've never had a reason to ask, if the person who is doing them a favor by implicating Steven Avery in this crime did anything themselves to facilitate this crime. But, sensing that the comment they just heard might break their house of cards, Detective Wiegert, probably reflexively and inadvertently, reacts with a question and an accusation that is so out of line from the prior questioning that I draw this conclusion because, quite frankly, like the entire case, nothing else makes sense. It's almost as if Mark Wiegert's saying, oh, we're going there, are we? Trying to crash the train that we built here? How about this? You're going down too, kid. Then, just as abruptly, sort of like a hoo-hoo almost got caught there, he ceases that line of questioning. Perhaps they plan to do that, but they have nothing to tie him to anything. Now, that's my theory, but listen to what's said. Then it goes on for 17 pages without any similar line of questioning until the next interview when they arrest him for the stuff he has yet to admit. On the tape, due to the coincidentally timed blankouts they have, you can't hear it, but the transcript has it. Here is the dialogue, quote for quote, nothing omitted, nothing interjected. Listen to how strange this turns on a dime. Wiegert, how has this affected you? Brendan Dassey, I've been sad for at least 3 or 4 months. Mark Wiegert, what have you been sad about? Brendan Dassey, I thought that he didn't do it and I felt sorry for Teresa's family. Wiegert, did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Teresa Halbach? Brendan Dassey, no. Wiegert, did you stab her? Brendan Dassey, no. Wiegert, did you help put the body in the fire? Brendan Dassey, no. Wiegert, did anybody else? Brendan Dassey, not that I know of. Fassbender, have you told anyone about this? Brendan Dassey, no. Fassbender, have you told your mother? Brendan Dassey, no. Fassbender, is your mother here today? Brendan Dassey, yeah. Yes, she is, Brendan. Yes, she is. But she's not in the room, and in less than a span of a weekend, she will never see her son outside of a cage, probably ever again. And Brendan Dassey, who will be concerned about getting back to his 6th-hour class so he can make sure that his project that is due gets turned in, he will instead wear an orange jumpsuit for having committed no crime and for trying to do a good deed by helping the police, even if that good deed was putting his own uncle behind bars until he's old enough to collect Social Security. Never to have learned how to drive, how to make love, how it feels to graduate and vote, how it feels to breathe fresh air. All because a group of loyal Boy Scouts who stick together until the end can't tolerate the fact that the very oath that they took to uphold the law doesn't apply to them, even in a case of the most egregious wrongdoing. This cartel of shields is about to use an innocent kid to cover up a mistake with a swiftness and veracity that should scare the hell out of every person of moral standing. The uneventful interview continues with no other mention of his involvement. It almost seems like a stall tactic to use up a bit of time. Similar to what one might do before walking out the door as to leave a hopeful post-coital conquest under the impression that you indeed will call. Instead, you're left with a death sentence and the word winning. Within a day, they talk to Brendan Dassey's mother, who tells them about a pair of jeans that put Brendan Dassey in the garage. A garage with no evidence, mind you, but a garage with spent cartridges. Which is why I think it is very important to hear the scientific evidence on what caliber bullet was thought to kill Teresa Halbach. Because even though Brendan Dassey is not a suspect, he does have a pair of jeans that put him in a garage that had .22 caliber shell casings all over the floor. They know that nobody else knows, they know how much time they have, and even though no one else knows it, they know what's about to happen. The bullet to assassinate the truth is in place, locked and loaded, and the empty case will wind up on the garage floor. March 1st interview. At the point I'm writing all this, I have yet to read the March 1st transcript past the first few pages or watch the interview, but my guess is that I'll be able to easily leave this stuff in here and simply reference it at the end with, "I guess I was right." That'd probably be pretty sad. I mean, am I that good at predicting human behavior, or are these guys that dumb? Maybe they're just that crooked. Either way, I'm making a prediction to hopefully prove a point, and I just did a short video blurb to myself for later reference about the fact that since I know where the last interview left off, and I know that they've only asked 3 questions about whether or not Brendan Dassey was involved in Teresa Halbach's murder, yet Brendan Dassey goes from him helping the case to him being arrested in less than 5 hours? Completely illogical, Captain. As I stated in the video I made to myself, I predict that they know that he doesn't know squat, and that they can get him to say pretty much whatever they want him to. They sculpt him into answering for crimes he didn't commit, which give them their narrative, their theoretical MMO, and enough media hype to slant any juror that is selected in order to once and for all bury their problem. I hope I'm wrong. Once again, I got into this life-sucking debacle to try and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Steven Avery is guilty of murdering Teresa Halbach, and I thought it was going to take me a half a day. Yet here I sit with almost 70 pages of typed text. I have only this last interview to watch and or read, and quite frankly, if it hasn't happened by now, it's probably not going to. I will say that what I have processed and come to thus far is about as frightening a scenario as you can get in America. I truly hope I'm wrong. If not, I highly doubt that any of my work will help to exonerate Steven Avery and or Brendan Dassey, but if I can at least get people to see things through a prism that has more than a one tunnel vision dimension, then perhaps I have opened the eyes of at least one person who, when put in a situation like this, keeps an open mind, opens up their eyes, and opens the one door that may be the difference between the open arms of freedom and the closed steel bars of false imprisonment. I truly, truly hope I'm wrong about this. And if you think I may be reaching in connecting some of these thoughts, remember, the prosecution put forth connections with not only no evidential plausibility, but frequent contrary plausibility, and one. So, in analyzing the first couple of pages, according to the transcript, thus far they haven't reached the police station interview room, and they start off reading Brendan Dassey's Miranda rights. Do they know that they're going to arrest him already? My guess is yes, considering how Mark Wiegert phrases it. I don't know if they have to let him know, but have they somehow identified him as the suspect or a person of interest? If so, how? What has he given them to make them think that? There was nothing on the last interview to shift course that dramatically. If so, does Brendan Dassey know that? Does his mom know that? They didn't read him the Miranda in the first interview, but they did on the last one, yet they asked him a total of 3 questions pertaining to him doing anything in this crime, to which he said no. So why read him his Miranda rights in the first place? If they don't Mirandize him and they ask him even one question about his involvement, does that land him in hot water? I don't know, I'm asking. If he's now a suspect or a person of interest, what the hell information do they have that would make them think that? He had no information pertaining to himself as a party to the crime. I'm pretty sure Steven Avery wasn't talking, and no new evidence was found, searched for, or alluded to by Brendan Dassey. Yet here he sits, Mirandized, and in less than 5 hours will never breathe free air again. What's going on? What's about to go down? The only thing that is different is that now they have information about his jeans that he was wearing that day when he helped Steven Avery clean the garage. That's it. That's the catalyst. As you will see in the transcript, they get the jeans from him at the time of this interview, not before. They haven't seen the jeans, they haven't held the jeans, they haven't tested the jeans, and nothing will come back on them as evidence of any crime taking place. Yet Brendan Dassey will never leave this interview room without donning a pair of handcuffs. So, to recap from before the last interview to now, let's see. 2 days after Jody stopped cooperating with Special Agent Tom Fossbender and Detective Mark Wiegert, they went after Brendan Dassey. Why they would try to jock Jody for info, I still remain perplexed. Why would you interview someone who has been locked up since before this whole thing began and has only had phone contact with the suspect and all of those calls are recorded? The only reason you would do that is if you were desperate for anything to lock down this case. So, since Jody stops talking, they next go to Brendan Dassey. The first 2 interviews were them asking what Steven Avery did, and they managed to get out of Brendan Dassey some things that, even though were all suggested by themselves, would hopefully help their case, but yet didn't match up with any of the physical evidence. That lack of physical evidence, according to what they asked Brendan Dassey, was that of Teresa Halbach supposedly being in the fire, Steven Avery stabbing her, and a few other uncorroborated events. Only 3 questions in both interviews asked Brendan Dassey if he had any involvement in Teresa Halbach's murder. The answers were all no, but they came all in a row after he honestly answered the question of why he's been so sad the last 3 or 4 months. His response, again, Brendan Dassey's own words, quote, "I thought that he didn't do it, and I felt sorry for Teresa's family." i.e., he thinks his uncle is innocent and he expresses sorrow, which, if anything, would indicate something other than being a cold-blooded murderer who would later supposedly admit to slitting a throat. This posed a problem for the prosecution, but also a solution. Anyone who could tell them about all this evil stuff that Steven Avery supposedly did, then proclaim that person's innocence in one fell swoop, is someone who is obviously lying and or who obviously has no idea as to the scope of what's going on. Someone with a usable, moldable mind. Just reading the first 2 pages of the transcript on March 1st, I'm pretty sure I know what is about to happen. The day in between the second interview with Brendan Dassey on February 27th, both the first 2 interviews were conducted on the same day in 2 different locations, an hour apart without a lawyer or his mother present, having the knowledge from the first interview that his mother would be at work until 5 p.m. Between that interview and this interview on March 1st, the police have no interaction with Brendan Dassey. At least according to official court documents that I've seen anyway. Does anyone have anything else on this to change my mind yet? Please? I was reading an article that said on February 27th they interviewed Brendan Dassey again and something he said caught their eye. That's a quote from the article. Okay, what? What was it? It continues with, quote, "Sheriff Potter later said in an interview, 'We believe Brendan knew more than he was telling us,' end quote." Okay, what did he know? You're already at the press conference to tell it, so what was the suspicion? They never said what tipped it. They only told the end result. Wouldn't that officer want accolades for catching that little subliminal tidbit? That magic aha moment that somebody suspected something that was about to break this case? Or was it really that he didn't tell you anything at all and the key really came from his mother, Barb Jonda? And forget bragging about it, why would that be something that you would be afraid to tell the public unless it was something to hide? Would that then mean you lied about how you came about bringing this Brendan Dassey testimony to light, involving someone that wasn't involved? Unless there is a piece of evidence that points to something else, the police lied about how they came to view Brendan Dassey as a suspect and how they went about throwing him in prison by unwittingly using his mother and their trust to bend his mind to their story. Now, bending the trust, I understand. Cops use that tactic all the time and it's very effective. But if they would have at least told Barb Janda even after the fact that, well, we think your son did this or helped do this because of X, and that's why we questioned him today, I wouldn't be tossing this theory around. But they didn't. All they said is what was said in the paper. Something caught their attention. He didn't give them anything. Neither did his mom. Nothing pertaining to what they knew anyway. The reason they didn't divulge what led them to the confession was because they didn't have anything. Nothing of substance anyway. What they did have was a building block for a story that fit their mold. A piece of evidence to place Brendan Dassey where they wanted him. Now you tell me, which makes for a better press release, especially for the prosecution? A tidbit of information led us to another clue which we are pursuing. Or, ignoring of course how it came about, we got a confession out of a previously unsuspected person who was helping with the case that also was a minor who turns out to be an accomplice after all this time, who confessed to a horrific, bloody, and sensational media frenzy way of murdering and mutilating this girl and giving us a how and why. Well, I can tell you which one the public and the media outlets would care less about after the fact. Because even though Brendan Dassey gives no indication that he has any involvement, and the fact that they only ask him 3 total questions of that nature, the 2 detectives somehow come across these 2 possibilities. That Brendan Dassey indeed is somehow involved with this, even though there's no physical evidence or testimony to prove anything that he is saying, or they need to make everyone think he is involved in this to fit their narrative to slam dunk this case. So, for whatever reason, either stupidity or malice, even though they could have waited to meet her, they instead call Brendan Dassey's mom, Barb Janda, on February 28th, or possibly late February 27th, and ask her questions on where Brendan was that night. Again, anything to find something to help them close out this case by whatever means, just like they did with Jody, another person they were questioning that had no involvement in this. Until this moment, nothing puts Brendan Dassey there. Again, until this moment, no physical evidence puts Brendan Dassey there. Nothing can be pinned on him because not only did he simply observe, but he was only there after the fact watching the body burn, allegedly. Now they have an item to put him wherever they want him. By the way, did they ever mention to Barb Janda anything that her son has told them so far? Seeing a burned body? Did they state that he is possibly a person of interest and or a suspect at this point? Because within hours he goes from informant to arrested. She somehow divulges that he did in fact help Steven Avery clean the garage on October 31st because he had bleach on his jeans. She, Barb Janda, not Brendan Dassey, said this. This will be key later. This is the piece of information they need to put their puzzle together, which is why they called her in the first place. For anything to be able to set their plans in motion. And the jeans put Brendan Dassey in the garage where, according to the detectives, since there are bullet casings there, even though no bullets were found, this crime is going to take place there. So even though there is no physical evidence that ever came up that Teresa Halbach was ever in Steven Avery's trailer, garage, or vehicles, they hear of Brendan Dassey cleaning the garage and they go into action. Because there could obviously be only one thing that he would be cleaning with bleach in the garage, right? So here's how it goes down. They call him in from school. Why do it that way instead of having Barb Janda drop him off? Why not pick him up at home so they could get the jeans and Brendan Dassey in one shot? What's missing from the way they did it? Oh yeah, Barb Janda, the one who told them about the jeans. If they pick up Brendan Dassey at home, or had Barb Janda drop him off, he or his mother could have easily brought the jeans and questions with them, but instead, once Brendan Dassey is in their custody which he will never leave, even though the jeans in question are supposed to have bleach stains on them, even though if there was ever blood on them, the jeans would have almost certainly denatured the DNA, even though those jeans have probably been washed a few times in the last 4 months, even though no luminol was used on them to show proof of any blood, human blood, deer blood, rabbit blood, whatever, those genes are never used as evidence, yet those genes are the key to bringing this conspiracy full circle. In the police car, or as best as I can tell from the transcript, Brendan is now leaving school with them and is on his way to the station when they casually Mirandize him. Unlike the first interview, they neglect to say, "You're not under arrest," because he certainly will be when they're done with him. Mark Wiegert tips his hand and says to Brendan Dassey, and this is a quote from the transcript, second page, Mark Wiegert, quote, "And if you play it right, who knows, maybe we'll get you back as soon as we can," end quote. Back to school is what they're referring to. Play it right? Who says that to somebody who's helping them out with a case? And that's a direct quote right from the opening of the transcript. Brendan Dassey up to this point has given no indication that he was in any way, shape, or form involved with the actual murder of Teresa Halbach, yet it sounds to me like they know the outcome of this interview, even though they don't know the story of how Teresa Halbach was killed yet. Wonder how that is. They don't know because there is no physical evidence to point them really to anything. And I'll point out that they still, to this day, probably have no idea what really happened to Teresa Halbach, assuming that Steven Avery was the one that killed her. Yet, here, two probably innocent people are sitting and rotting in prison for something that never happened. Oh, and I know there's some of you out there, of course something happened, Teresa Halbach's dead. You know what I mean. Steven Avery or Brendan Dassey killing Teresa Halbach. The fact that they don't know anything is a blessing for them, since they can pretty much say whatever they want and not have to worry about an outside source questioning them. Was something said that I missed that would guide them in the direction that Brendan Dassey was involved? All the genes do is put Brendan Dassey in the garage, but nothing happened in the garage. In fact, Tom Fassbender asked him numerous times if the garage door, the big garage door, was open, even asking, "Are you sure?" numerous times. So if they think he has something to do with it and the genes only point them towards the garage, a garage with no physical evidence, what can they possibly accomplish? Not to mention, what can they accomplish with such worthless information that thus far has been given? Unless the information isn't worthless, and there's only one thing that makes it worth something: old bullet casings. Then, after having him sign that same type of waiver, having built up his trust since he's walked away twice before with no reason to suspect him, and it's not like they had to rush this part since the crime happened 4 months ago, they ask permission if they can go into his house and grab those jeans his mom talked about just hours before. They will, however, have to rush this. They ask Brendan Dassey, not Barb Jonda, about confiscating the jeans, the exact opposite of where they got the information about the jeans. Remember, I said that this was key. The genes that they asked Barb Jonda about, but they had to ask Brendan Dassey if they could have. If neither Barb Jonda or Brendan Dassey knows what is about to happen, it's easier to pull the wool. The most effective strike, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, is the one you can't defend because you can't see it coming. It's like asking your mom if you could walk to your friend's house for a sleepover, then asking your dad for the keys to the car. Why would they not just ask Barb Jonda for the jeans the day before while they were on the phone with her? Barb Jonda would have probably consented to the search for obtaining the jeans because, after all, if they did contain evidence, which again they didn't, they would only corroborate her son's story that he got there after the fact, and if anything, did whatever his uncle told him to because he would have been afraid of what his uncle might do to him, even if that meant cleaning up a poor, murdered Teresa Halbach's blood and watching her body burn. Hell, she probably would have brought them right to the detectives, right to the station, to help him out, just like her son was doing. In fact, it would have saved them a trip. But they can't risk the chance of her possibly catching wind of their plan, which would stifle their attempt to mold their story through her son. The beginning of the March 1st transcript is what looks to be a recording of the cops and Brendan Dassey going from the high school to the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, but before the interview tape kicks in at the sheriff's office. After the Miranda warning, they talk about having someone go pick the jeans up, but Wiegert says, and I quote, "We're this close, we could just go grab them, how's that?" End quote. Interesting, considering that Brendan Dassey's house is the opposite direction from Mishicot High School than the sheriff's office is. Then, when they get the jeans, Tom Fassbender asks which way to go to get to Manitowoc. Mark Wiegert asks Brendan, who doesn't have a license yet, just like he told them in the car on the ride to his house mere minutes before, so I don't know if this was in jest or if he really didn't know, but his answer is puzzling considering it's a Calumet County law enforcement officer who probably knows the area pretty well, but the next sentence out of his mouth seems to indicate he doesn't know where he is, especially for someone who wanted to pick up the jeans themselves because he knew they were so close. If you knew you were so close, how do you not know where you are? Sounds to me like somebody who knew how to get there, but wasn't really concerned with an exit strategy on how to get back. Why would that be? But you just somehow knew that you were this close? Mark Wiegert says, and this is a paraphrase, "Oh, let's take a right and head down Highway B. It's the quickest way I know of." Sounds like when you're going to a strip club, you only have one agenda and you only care about getting there. No exit strategy. Getting home, you'll worry about that when your mission's accomplished. Did Barb Jonda know that they were going to get the jeans that day? The jeans that put him in the garage, cleaning something? Remember, according to Brendan Dassey's own testimony, unless he said something that I missed, there was a body there that night in the fire. Teresa Halbach's body, right? That's it. No mention of an actual crime in the garage, no mention of a shooting crime in the garage, no mention of shooting anything or anybody anywhere. But the cops know that there were 11 .22 caliber shells found scattered in no particular pattern in the garage. Now, if you're in the garage with bleach, it has to be from cleaning up blood from shooting Teresa Halbach, right? Couldn't be from anything else. Would a judge have bought that argument for a search warrant, seeing as no blood was ever found, as was no bullet until hours after this interview? But back to the bleach. The bleach couldn't possibly be used for anything else, right? Which is a weak argument, because if you shoot someone 10 plus times, there will be a lot of blood, which they would have found. Riddle me this, detective. If you're on your hands and knees cleaning a giant pool of blood with bleach, wouldn't you throw those bullets away when you came across them, or at least toss them out of your way, in which case they'd be in a very large, somewhat linear pattern? If you're cleaning, you're going to be throwing whatever it is in your cleaning area away from you, whatever direction you're facing, pitching the bullets out of your way. By the way, did any of those bullets have blood or bleach on them? It would stand to reason that if you're going to use bleach to clean up a giant pool of blood from gunshots, that the bullet casings wouldn't get there afterwards, would they? When there's no longer blood or wet bleach on the ground? So, even though those jeans had no evidence of any murder on them, they start the ball rolling. They've obviously talked to Brendan Dassey's mom, but whatever it is that they talked about, as far as I know, has never been disclosed. But what I'm guessing is that they probably didn't contain anything regarding Brendan Dassey about to be locked up, or something that could potentially lock Brendan Dassey up. I think there may be some articles online about that, but unless they're discussing something more than Brendan Dassey coming home with bleach on his jeans, it's probably a moot point. If it's otherwise, please let me know. If it's something else, it may make this whole argument pointless, but I don't know who else has looked into this, so regardless, I doubt that if Barb Jonda would have suspected that the info she gave about those jeans, again, jeans with no evidence on them whatsoever, were about to put her son in prison as long as she's alive, while she wasn't present and or an attorney wasn't present, I doubt she would have allowed any of it. Remember when I said this was key, that they asked Barb Jonda about the jeans, but then asked Brendan Dassey to get the jeans? This is where it comes into play. Because of this, the officers know they've got one shot. If Barb Jonda catches a whiff of this, it's all over. That's why they grill Brendan Dassey for 5 hours. Tom Fossbender lets Brendan Dassey know that his mom is okay with this. Of course, since Brendan Dassey's innocent, what is there for him to worry about, right? He's going to be able to go home and watch wrestling. And right out of the gate, Mark Wiegert asked Brendan about those jeans with the bleach stains and asked permission to go grab them. These jeans are the catalyst for Brendan Dassey going to jail, yet they are barely mentioned in the rest of the interview. Why is that? Because they're not important. All they do is put him in the place that they need him. You would think that a piece of evidence that significant to breaking the case would get a bit more airtime than it does, but no. Keep in mind, I still haven't read past the first few pages of the March 1st transcript, but the jeans are the first thing out of his mouth after the Miranda warning. They talked to him twice, 2 days before, and the jeans never came up, at least in the transcripts. They talked to his mother the day before, and they were bringing him in that day, and yet, 1, they couldn't have Barb Jonda or Brendan Dassey bring their own clothes to the station, and 2, even though he's a juvenile and neither his mother nor a lawyer is present, they now supposedly have permission from a juvenile to search his house and find anything that may be of value to the investigation? No one finds this questionable? By the way, are juveniles allowed to give consent to search an adult's home, especially in a capital case? How would they make that argument to the judge for a search warrant if legal consent was not given? If they grabbed the jeans from the house of an adult via the consent of a minor in the thought that it may pertain to a crime, how would that be legally justified? I don't know the law on this, so I'm asking. Forget that without physical proof to back it up, even after the fact that the minor committed an assault and or murder, how would they argue that? Would that have been enough to grant a mistrial? If they grabbed the jeans and just happened upon his guilty admission, It's still the consent of a minor, but the genes not tying, ever, to physical evidence would imply that they had no reason to talk to him about that. If they get the genes and the permission to do so was considered illegitimate by law, then the case could be thrown out, could it not? Because if the genes are the only thing that tie Brendan Dassey to the garage, ergo the murder, ergo the line of questioning, then this whole case can be thrown out, can it not? They could also state that due to the fact that the genes information from Barb Jonda are the only thing that placed Brendan Dassey in the garage, without corroborating evidence to prove that the genes tie him to the crime that has been committed, you could also possibly argue that there was not even strong enough evidence to obtain a warrant for the genes to counteract the fact that a minor illegally gave consent to search. Could you not? Considering it was after the fact of the initial search in November, and even so there was no evidence to go along with it, ergo the case would not have been able to proceed, so without that information, ergo there was no testimony, and with that breach you could perhaps push for an automatic mistrial and maybe get another hearing and or a release. Could you not? Without the legal consent to search, technically they can't get the genes, which lead to Brendan Dassey telling them about the crime even though there was no evidence for it, correct? Bam! Mistrial! Since none of that testimony is true, can it be used as a reason for a new trial? Again, I don't know. I'm asking. Just wildly brainstorming hypothesis here. But if so, that'd be a bummer because this is what puts Brendan Dassey behind bars. 3. Yeah, I know a lot of time has passed in between 1, 2, and 3. Unless they talk to him sometime in between the second interview and the third interview, when did the genes ever come up? They didn't. It came from Brendan Dassey's mom, which technically exposes their plan of sculpting the story behind her back and might be able to be used in granting another trial. Oh, wait. How do you get a new trial when the questionably obtained information that put Brendan Dassey behind bars isn't real? How do you prove something is a lie when the truth in the case is a lie to begin with? My head hurts. Point is, when the police said that Brendan Dassey, quote-unquote, said something that caught their attention, it's a lie. They happened upon other information which allowed their narrative to close their case for them. So when did they talk to him about those genes? That sure as hell wasn't on the transcript. Not that I saw anyway. And if you know he's got them since you talked to his mom about them, why would you even ask if he still has them? You would only say those two things to establish those criteria. That he's got them and that you have a record of somebody giving you permission to search something. You already know the answer to a question which the action hasn't happened yet. That, by definition, is prior knowledge. So, when Mark Wiegert says stammering with ums, if you'll notice that's not something he does in the first two interviews, Mark Wiegert says, one question I had for you real quick, Brendan, is, those genes that Tom had talked to you about the other night, implying longer ago than last night, which is the last night that they talked, to Barb Jonda, not Brendan Dassey, assuming that it was on February 28th, there was only a 1-day span in between the last time they met and this moment. Again, a discussion that, according to the transcript of the second interview, never took place, which means that Mark Wiegert is currently and knowingly lying about this, which is probably why he stammers. Not only are those genes the catalyst to the interview that's about to take place, he knows that he's about to get permission, arguably illegal permission, to grab those genes that give him his corroborating physical evidence that only puts Brendan Dassey in the garage, not actually doing anything related to Teresa Halbach's actual murder, physical evidence to which he needs to do what he's about to do. He also knows that Tom Fossbender never talked with Brendan Dassey about those genes, and yet Brendan Dassey says yes. Brendan Dassey saying yes to this is a lie, and Mark Wiegert knows it. This is the moment where everything changes. Mark Wiegert knows that even though this is a lie, no one will ever suspect that it is because no one will ever catch it. He knows now that Brendan Dassey lied about something that Brendan Dassey thought was true. And why not? He concurs with other things that they say that didn't happen. Why not this? But the big difference is that Mark Wiegert hasn't yet come across any question to ask Brendan Dassey that he already knew the answer to in order to test out if what he was suggesting Brendan Dassey say was true or whether Brendan Dassey was just agreeing with what they said for reasons unknown. Knowing this, Mark Wiegert finally knows that Brendan Dassey has been parroting what they say with no physical evidence to support it, which doesn't matter up until this point because they have nothing that puts him there during the crime. But now they have the genes, which lead to the garage. The garage that Tom Fossbender seemed to be convinced was not open, a garage which has bullet casings in it, which now Brendan Dassey will tell of how something happened in there, and with them at the helm, they will be able to tell whatever story they want and tie in actual physical evidence soon enough. All they will need is one bullet. A bullet that will be found in a matter of hours after dozens of trained professionals somehow missed it after 8 days, with 2 county departments, with multiple state and federal agencies and forensic teams searching that very area. A bullet that will conveniently appear and will have Teresa Halbach's DNA on it. Not blood, not tissue, even though it either went through a skull or a body that had enough kinetic energy to continue to fly across a garage and under an air compressor, but DNA. Contaminated DNA, mind you, which should have been ruled inconclusive, ergo inadmissible in court, but DNA nonetheless. DNA which was processed by a so-called professional, but never copied. DNA which is now used up. DNA that can no longer be tested by anyone else for any reason. DNA which will send Brendan Dassey to jail for most of his life before he's even old enough to buy a scratch-off ticket. All of this simply because the cops have a golden horseshoe wedged far enough rectally that they not only have a witness that will say whatever they want him to say, but now they have something, weak as it is, something to place him at a, not the crime, and questionable planted forensic evidence to follow suit. As I stated at the beginning of this, having only the film as a starting point, before I even uncovered this stuff, I said, if this crime story was a fiction with how everything played out with this deus ex machina crap falling conveniently into place at the right time, this book would sell 5 copies. That still stands. This is tripe. But to continue the quote from Mr. Wiegert, with the bleach stains on them, do you still have those? Brendan Dassey, yeah. I'll read that to you again. Mark Wiegert, full quote. One question I had for you real quick, Brendan, is those jeans that Tom had talked to you about the other night with the bleach stains on them, do you still have those? And Brendan Dassey says yes, that was his exact quote. They knew that asking Brendan Dassey that question only for him to answer with an affirmative response that they knew to be false, yet he thought to be true, proves that they had the ability and intent to put words in Brendan Dassey's mouth, and now they have physical, quote-unquote, evidence to put him where they want him, where the bullet casings are, to plant the final piece of evidence that will tie Brendan Dassey to the garage and Steven Avery to the bullet that will have Teresa Halbach's DNA on it to put them both behind bars far longer than the true perpetrators of this crime will ever live. Everything else they could claim they weren't aware of, which, since it's not true, they'd be correct. This shows that right after acquiring something to put Brendan Dassey at the scene, they put known false words into his mouth, which start his well-planned, well-hidden self-incriminatory statement leading to his arrest, and nobody was the wiser. Gotta hand it to you, gentlemen. Well played. They knew what was about to go down, and I hope that they one day have someone, the likes of them, date their daughters so they know the misery that they've thrust upon the innocent. Now, since I have made my prediction, I will watch this last interview to see if surprise washes over my face or tears. Another thing of note, the tape of the interview doesn't start where the transcript does, but in this transcript I could swear that this video was played somewhere, maybe the film, but you will notice a couple things in this transcript. When they are in the car and going to the station, they go to Brendan Dassey's house to pick up those jeans. They ask him about how he gets to school, which is by bus, which they already know. Again, why are they asking him questions that they already know the answer to? In order to gauge whether or not they can put words in his mouth? It all ties in. They ask if his older brother Blaine sometimes gives him a ride to school. Brendan says that Blaine has his license but no car, which is admittedly odd because they do live at an auto salvage yard. Note, there could be many reasons why he doesn't have a car. Grades, insurance, money, etc. But anyway, they ask Brendan Dassey if he has his license yet, and he says he still has one thing to do with the instructor, meaning he's got one more thing to do before he himself can get his driver's license. And I could swear I saw this somewhere. Again, perhaps in the film, but reading this rings a big bell. But I only have the transcript in front of me, so since there's no audio for inflections, one can't be sure of anything, but I found this odd. Here's the transcript, and they're either approaching or on the Avery property. Mark Wiegert says, "You got to do one more thing with the instructor?" Brendan Dassey says nothing. Mark Wiegert says, "Looking forward to that?" Brendan Dassey says nothing. Mark Wiegert, "I'm sure you could find yourself a car out here somewhere." To which Tom Fossbender laughs. "I'm sure you could find yourself a car out here somewhere." Okay, pure speculation, and it may be perfectly innocent, but were they talking about the same fact that I mentioned about not being able to find a car to drive in a salvage yard full of cars? Or were they jokingly hinting about finding Teresa Halbach's car? The cliche inside joke exists for a reason. So, now to watch the interview. As I listen to the point where they finally go past the, "You understand that you're the hero here, right? So tell us more about what happened." Really? Heroes get blamed and arrested? Garbage. Before they finally start questioning him, they start off with saying, "We already know you're in the garage and stuff, cleaning up and stuff, so tell us about that." Right out of the gate. No goal here. So, how will it wind up with him in handcuffs? I'm only going to write down the points that jump out at me that I think are worth noting. It's a long interview, and I'm willing to bet that there are so many comments that I want